China just delivered a knockout punch that has Tesla scrambling and the entire United States government in crisis mode. And what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you see the electric vehicle revolution forever. Here's the question that should keep every American awake at night. What happens when the country we're locked in a trade war with controls the very technology we need to save our planet and our economy? By the end of this video, you'll understand why this isn't just about cars or batteries. This is about the future of American power itself, and the shocking revelation I'll share in the final minutes will make you question everything you thought you knew about going green. The promise was beautiful, wasn't it? Electric vehicles would save the environment, create millions of American jobs, and make us energy independent while we left our gas-guzzling past behind. Politicians from both parties championed this vision. Tech billionaires invested hundreds of billions, and everyday Americans started dreaming of a cleaner, more sustainable future powered by innovation and American ingenuity. Tesla became the poster child of this revolution, with Elon Musk promising to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy while creating the most valuable car company on Earth right here in the United States. The government poured in subsidies, tax credits, and regulatory support, building an entire policy framework around the assumption that electric vehicles represented not just environmental progress, but economic and strategic advantage for America in the 21st century. But here's where the story takes a dark turn that nobody saw coming. And this next fact will absolutely shock you. In July 2025, China made a move that sent shockwaves through every boardroom in Detroit, every government office in Washington, and every Tesla factory from California to Texas. The Chinese government announced sweeping export controls on critical lithium battery technologies, and suddenly the uncomfortable truth became impossible to deny. If you're an American watching this, you're about to discover that our green revolution isn't powered by American innovation, American workers, or American resources. It's completely dependent on a country that views us as their primary strategic competitor and has no qualms about using that dependence as a weapon. This is the part no one in Washington wants you to hear. The numbers are so staggering they seem almost impossible to believe. But every single data point has been verified by industry analysts, government reports, and corporate filings. China doesn't just participate in the lithium battery supply chain. They absolutely dominate it in ways that would make 19th century oil barons jealous. Imagine if one country controlled 94% of all the oil in the world. That's exactly what China has done with lithium iron phosphate production, the battery chemistry that powers most affordable electric vehicles. They process 65% of the world's lithium. That's like controlling 2/3 of all the water in America. They produce 70% of cathode materials, control 85% of anode production, and manufacture 75% of all battery cells globally. When you drive that Tesla Model 3 or Ford Lightning, you're essentially driving a Chinese product assembled in America, and most Americans have absolutely no idea. But here's where it gets even worse. And what I'm about to tell you about Tesla will make your jaw drop. Tesla, the company that was supposed to revolutionize transportation and energy, finds itself in a position that can only be described as strategically catastrophic. Approximately 40% of Tesla's entire battery supply chain depends on Chinese companies, making it one of the most China-dependent major corporations in America. To put this in perspective, that's like having almost half of your house built on land owned by your worst enemy. China accounts for over 30% of Tesla's revenues, and potentially 50% or more of its profitability, according to Morgan Stanley analysis. The company's Shanghai Gigafactory, built with $1.4 billion in loans from Chinese state-owned banks, could be jeopardized overnight if tensions escalate further. And this next fact will shock you to your core. Tesla's market share in China has collapsed from 11% in early 2021 to just 4% by 2025. With sales declining 30% year over year, as Chinese competitors systematically destroy Tesla's position in the world's largest EV market. That's like going from being the king of the hill to barely hanging on by your fingernails in less than 4 years. Tesla went from selling luxury status symbols to Chinese consumers to being treated like yesterday's news while homegrown Chinese brands take over. But here's where the story gets even more disturbing, and this is something every American needs to understand. The Chinese didn't stumble into this dominance by accident or through superior free market competition. Between 2009 and 2023, China invested over $230 billion in subsidies to their EV sector. To put that in perspective, that's more money than the entire GDP of most countries, all focused on one industry. They created an ecosystem where Chinese companies could operate without the profit constraints faced by Western competitors, like playing poker with unlimited money while everyone else has to count every chip. This next revelation will make you realize how far behind we really are. Contemporary Amperex technology, known as KTL, the world's largest battery manufacturer, has developed proprietary processes that can produce batteries with 323 miles of range from just 5 minutes of charging. That's like filling up your gas tank in the time it takes to grab a coffee, except it's enough power to drive from New York to Washington, D.C. Their competitor BYD delivers 249 miles of range in 5 minutes, capabilities that exceed even Tesla's supercharger network performance. Imagine if your smartphone could charge to full power in the time it takes to tie your shoes. That's the level of technological advancement we're talking about. And this is the part that should terrify every American strategist. The technological superiority extends far beyond current production capabilities into next-generation development that makes our current efforts look like horse and buggy technology. Chinese companies are leading the race toward all-solid-state batteries, with Taiwan New Energy developing prototypes with energy densities of 720 watt-hours per kilogram, potentially supporting vehicle ranges of over 1,300 miles on a single charge. That's like driving from Los Angeles to Denver on a single charge, something that seemed impossible just 5 years ago. But here's the revelation that changes everything. This innovation advantage stems from China's control over raw materials processing, where they refine 95% of the world's manganese, 70% of cobalt and graphite, 67% of lithium, and over 60% of nickel. It's like they own the recipe, the ingredients, the kitchen, and the restaurant all at the same time. They don't just make the batteries, they control every single input required to make the batteries, creating a vertically integrated monopoly that would be illegal under American antitrust law if it existed within our borders. This next fact will show you why July 2025 represents a turning point in modern history. What happened that month represents something far more sinister than industrial competition. And this is where the story transforms from economic concern into national security nightmare. China's Ministry of Commerce announced export restrictions on 8 critical technologies for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries, essentially giving Beijing veto power over any technology transfers that could help other countries reduce their dependence on Chinese battery manufacturing. Think of it like China holding the patents to electricity itself and deciding who gets to turn on the lights. And this is what no politician wants you to understand. These aren't traditional trade barriers or tariffs that can be negotiated or circumvented through creative supply chain management. These are restrictions on the intellectual property and manufacturing processes themselves, the technological DNA that could enable other countries to develop independent battery capabilities. China can now decide which companies in which countries get access to the knowledge required to build competitive batteries, turning technological dependence into a tool of geopolitical control. It's like having the smartest kid in class decide who gets to see the answers to the test. But here's where it gets absolutely terrifying for every American. The timing reveals the calculated nature of this strategy. And what I'm about to tell you will make you realize this was planned decades in advance. These controls came just as Chinese lithium iron phosphate batteries were experiencing unprecedented global adoption, accounting for 70% of new EVs in China and rapidly gaining market share internationally. By managing emerging technologies across the entire EV industry, China has positioned itself to strengthen its competitive position, while simultaneously weakening every potential rival. It's economic warfare disguised as industrial policy, and if you're an American consumer, worker, or investor, you're the target. This next development shows you just how desperate the situation has become. Tesla's response reveals both the company's awareness of its vulnerability and the enormous challenges facing any attempt to achieve independence. Recognizing its strategic exposure, Tesla has accelerated development of its proprietary 4680 battery cells as a pathway to reduced Chinese dependence. By the end of 2024, Tesla achieved what it calls a critical milestone, making its in-house 4680 battery cells the lowest-cost battery cell produced per kilo weight, supposedly surpassing external suppliers. The company operates a cathode refinery at its Texas Gigafactory and has nearly completed construction of a lithium refinery in Corpus Christi, with capacity to produce 50 gigawatt-hours of battery-grade lithium per year. But here's the reality check that should concern every American watching this video. Even with these massive investments and technological developments, Tesla's progress remains painfully slow compared to Chinese scaling capabilities. Tesla celebrated producing its 100 millionth 4680 battery cell in September 2024, with current production averaging 495,000 battery cells per day. That sounds impressive until you realize that's enough cells to power fewer cars in a single day than Toyota sells globally in an hour. Plans call for reaching 72 gigawatt-hours annual production by 2025 and 650 gigawatt-hours by 2030. And this next comparison will show you the true scale of the challenge. These numbers sound impressive until you realize that CATL alone has announced plans for over 500 gigawatt-hours of annual capacity by 2025. And that's just one Chinese company among dozens rapidly expanding production. It's like watching a high school basketball team prepare to play the Lakers. The gap in capability is that enormous. Here's what the Biden administration doesn't want you to know about their response. They recognized the strategic threat and launched what represents the largest industrial policy intervention in the battery sector since the early days of the automobile industry. The Inflation Reduction Act provides $35 per kilowatt-hour for domestically produced battery cells and $10 per kilowatt-hour for battery modules, effectively reducing domestic production costs by $45 per kilowatt-hour. These subsidies have theoretically made high-nickel U.S. batteries cost-competitive against Chinese lithium iron phosphate imports for the first time. The investment impact has been dramatic, with U.S. gigafactory capacity in the pipeline increasing from 700 gigawatt-hours in July 2022 to over 1.2 terawatt-hours by July 2023, representing more than $100 billion in announced private sector investments. But this next revelation exposes the fundamental contradiction in American policy. The government has awarded over $6 billion in grants to support domestic mining, processing, and manufacturing capabilities across 25 projects in 14 states. These investments target specific vulnerabilities in the supply chain, considering that the U.S. currently produces less than 1% of lithium products globally. That's like trying to become energy independent while producing 1 drop of oil for every 100 barrels you consume. Recent grants support everything from lithium extraction in Nevada to rare earth processing in California, representing the most significant federal investment in critical minerals since World War II. And here's the part that will make you realize why this problem might be unsolvable. Simultaneously, companies like Ford have committed $3.5 billion to build a lithium iron phosphate plant using licensed CATL technology, while General Motors has entered discussions for similar arrangements. American policy is attempting to reduce Chinese dependence while licensing Chinese technology because we lack the domestic capabilities to compete. It's like trying to become independent from your drug dealer while still buying drugs from them because you don't know how to make them yourself. This next fact shows you why tariffs alone cannot solve America's dependence. The trade war has escalated beyond export controls to include punitive tariffs designed to reshape global supply chains, but the results reveal the depth of American dependence rather than providing solutions. The Trump administration imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and 82.4% tariffs on Chinese lithium-ion batteries, while China retaliated with 34% tariffs on all U.S. products. Chinese lithium iron phosphate cells now face combined tariffs exceeding 80% when imported to the United States, pushing prices back to levels last seen in 2022. For Tesla and other manufacturers, this represents a potential cost increase of $1,000 or more per battery pack. And guess who ultimately pays that cost? Every American consumer buying an electric vehicle. But here's where it gets absolutely insane, and this example will show you the impossible nature of these trade conflicts. The graphite market exemplifies why tariffs alone cannot solve supply chain dependence. The U.S. imposed 93.5% anti-dumping duties on Chinese graphite imports in July 2025, despite China supplying 75% of global production. Each electric vehicle contains 50 to 100 kilograms of graphite. That's like needing 200 pounds of a material that only one country knows how to make properly. It would be like banning imports of flour while trying to become the world's biggest bread producer. And this admission from Elon Musk himself will show you how trapped even Tesla has become. Even Musk acknowledges the challenges with Tesla, indicating in February 2025 that while it had arrangements to source graphite from American suppliers, these companies have not yet demonstrated the technical capability to produce commercial quantities of anode-grade graphite of the quality and purity levels required by Tesla and other battery cell manufacturers. When the world's most innovative automaker admits they can't find American companies capable of making the materials they need, you know how deep the problem runs. But here's the revelation that will change how you think about this entire situation, and this is the part that should make every American realize the true scope of what we're facing. The battery supply chain has evolved from an industrial concern into a central element of national security strategy, with implications that extend far beyond civilian transportation. A comprehensive report from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies warns that Chinese control over advanced battery supply chains represents a significant threat to U.S. national security and economic interests. Batteries are increasingly critical for military applications, from electric military vehicles to energy storage for forward operating bases. The U.S. faces a 2027 deadline to eliminate Chinese materials from defense batteries, creating urgent pressure for supply chain diversification that may be technically impossible to achieve. This next story will show you how far China's control extends into American operations. The military dimension became starkly apparent when China's rare earth export controls disrupted Tesla's Optimus humanoid robot production. Musk revealed that China required assurances that rare earth magnets would not be used for military applications, highlighting how civilian and defense supply chains have become inextricably intertwined. Imagine if every smartphone manufacturer had to promise China they wouldn't help the US military before being allowed to buy components. That's the level of control we're talking about. And this projection will terrify you about America's technological future. Beyond batteries, the conflict encompasses semiconductor supply chains critical for electric vehicles, with analysts projecting that a potential Taiwan conflict would cripple Tesla's chip supply and slash revenue by approximately 25%. This creates compound vulnerabilities where American companies face dependencies on China for batteries and Taiwan for semiconductors, making them hostage to geopolitical events beyond their control. It's like having your house's foundation built in one earthquake zone and your roof supported by beams from another earthquake zone. But what comes next will surprise you. And this reveals China's master plan beyond just controlling America. China's strategy encompasses emerging markets where Western competitors have limited presence. In the first quarter of 2023, 3 out of 4 EVs sold in Southeast Asia were produced by Chinese firms. Brazil became the largest export market for Chinese electric vehicles in 2024, demonstrating how Chinese companies are capturing growth markets while facing restrictions in developed economies. While America and Europe argue about tariffs, China is quietly taking over the rest of the world's car markets. And this advantage will show you why China's lead may be permanent. The educational and innovation ecosystem advantages that China has built represent perhaps the most concerning long-term challenge for American competitiveness. China has nearly 50 graduate programs focused on battery chemistry or metallurgy, compared to a handful of U.S. programs. That's like training 50 engineers for everyone we train, and they're all focused specifically on beating us. This educational infrastructure, combined with massive research and development investments and integrated supply chains, creates sustainable competitive advantages that are extremely difficult to replicate. Here's the investment that shows China isn't slowing down. The Chinese government has provided 6 billion yuan, nearly $830 million, to companies including CATL and BYD for next-generation solid-state battery research. This coordinated approach contrasts sharply with more fragmented Western efforts, where companies must balance commercial optimization and strategic competition while maintaining separate profit centers and market-driven investment decisions. It's like watching a coordinated army fight against individual soldiers who can't even communicate with each other. Here's the final revelation that ties everything together and explains why this situation represents an existential challenge for American economic and technological leadership. The conflict over lithium battery supply chains represents a fundamental shift in how global industries will operate in an era of great power competition. The implications extend far beyond batteries to encompass broader questions about technological sovereignty, supply chain resilience, and economic security. The era of globally integrated supply chains optimized purely for cost efficiency has ended, giving way to more complex arrangements that balance efficiency with security and resilience considerations. And this is what every American needs to understand about the new world we're entering. China's power over lithium batteries exemplifies a new form of technological statecraft, where control over critical supply chains becomes a tool of geopolitical influence. And the export controls announced in July 2025 demonstrate how quickly technological advantages can be weaponized in great power competition. We're not just competing economically anymore, we're fighting for technological survival. For Tesla specifically, and for every American company trying to compete in this new reality. Success will depend on executing battery-independent strategies while maintaining technological competitiveness against Chinese companies that operate with massive government support, integrated supply chains, and decades of accumulated advantages. Tesla's progress toward cost parity with Chinese suppliers and its 4680 batteries represents a critical milestone. But scaling production to meet global demand while competing against Chinese companies that can operate at a loss indefinitely remains a monumental challenge that may determine whether American innovation survives the 21st century. What is absolutely certain is that the age of naive globalization, where economic efficiency trumped all other considerations, has permanently ended. The future will be shaped by companies and countries that can balance technological excellence with strategic autonomy, a challenge that will define competition for decades to come, and determine whether America maintains its position as the world's leading economy and technological innovator, or whether we become a dependent client state of the Chinese economic empire. In our next video, we'll expose how China's control over rare earth metals makes the battery situation look like child's play, and reveal the shocking extent to which your smartphone, your car, your military, and your entire way of life depends on materials that China can cut off with the stroke of a pen, leaving America defenseless in ways that will absolutely terrify you.